Welcome back to the Donkey Vote podcast with Francis.
Tobias.
And George. These interviews will be focusing on the past careers of politicians before they entered parliament.
With a strong intention to our audience that anything is achievable no matter what you studied in university or college.
If you like this sort of content, please make sure you like, subscribe, comment, and share with your friends. Also, we are on YouTube and Spotify, so make sure you follow us on those platforms.
Make sure to follow us on Instagram as well to keep updated with the latest episodes and reels that we release.
Enjoy
the
the
interview.
Today we are joined by a senator in Queensland, Senator Matt Canavan. Senator, thank you for joining us today.
Great to be with you, mate.
Just for our audience out there who may not know an entire lot about your background, could you give us a little brief explanation just before we get into the questions?
Yeah, well, look, I'm from Queensland. I grew up just south of Brisbane in the Logan area. When I was a kid, all I wanted to do was play Test cricket for Australia. That was my dream and desire. I was obsessed by cricket. Used to play it all the time. Soon, eventually, learnt that I wasn't going to be able to do that. And look, fortunately, as my life panned out, I've been able to represent Australia and in our nation's parliament, which has been a great honour. After school, I went and did economics at university. I thought of myself as a bit of a communist at the time, despite my background behind me. But what's the old saying? If you're not a communist when you're 20, you don't have a heart. And if you're still one by the time you're 30, you don't have a brain. So I met that test, grew out of that, got to really like economics and pursued that as a career. So after a university, I was fortunate enough to get a graduate position with the Productivity Commission. I think a venerable institution in our nation, and that taught me a lot about applied economics, if you like, how economics is applied in the real world, which is what I've always been interested in. That led to an interest in politics, got involved in that as well. I did work in the private sector for a little bit with KPMG in finance, and then eventually my interest in politics led me to work for Barnaby Joyce, and that was a great experience. Learned a lot from Barnaby, and then fortunate enough, a few people encouraged me to run for the Senate and got elected in 2013, started in 2014, so coming up on 10 years now in the Senate. And I'm sure we'll go through lots of other parts of my career, so I might leave it there. But I've been very proud to be a Senator for Queensland for the past 10 years.
Yep. Just quickly as well, did your interest in politics really peak towards that university time, or do you think that you got more interested in politics the more you got into the private sector and the more you started working for those business and enterprises?
Look, in fact, it started earlier than that. I suppose the real seed was planted by a history teacher I had in grade 10, and I'm a huge believer in the importance of our education system to stimulate young minds, partly because of my experience. So Mr. Grulich was a great history teacher. He himself had lived behind the Iron Curtain and taught a great subject or term, semester, whatever it was, on Cold War history. And he was certainly not a communist, having lived under communist rule, but his course actually led me to read the Communist Manifesto. And I started reading Das Kapital, never got through it all. It's a pretty turgid book, but it got me interested in that. And at the time I thought, yep, this is a good idea. Everything from everyone's wants through to everyone's needs. That makes sense. Maybe the socialism stuff is a good idea, but eventually then I did read more widely. So I got really interested in politics through that. And philosophy, if you like, political philosophy. So, I eventually picked up a guy called George Orwell, and he started me down the path correcting my socialist sympathies about how maybe that was a little bit misguided. A good idea in theory, but didn't really work in practice. So that's what started it all, really. And I never thought, though, I would become a frontline politician. I was more interested in it. I did philosophy at university as well. I started political science, but didn't really enjoy that, so I did English instead. I really enjoyed that aspect of it, that more theoretical discussion aspect of it. That's led me into economics, and I was enjoying that. Sort of fell into politics in a way, in frontline politics, that is. But yeah, I've been really honoured to serve in the last 10 years in that role as well.
Yep. And we'll probably get straight into the questions. I know you did touch on it there, a little bit about your high school life, but how was your high school and university life, Senator? And do you have any memorable moments?
Look, I've had a pretty typical upbringing. I went to a high school called Chisholm Catholic College. It was a new school. It was only I was only the second year through, so
Oh,
we
wow.
didn't really have the experience of being hazed by the grade 12s. The ones above were just above that. I remember I just drove past the school the other day with my kids. I was down there for a basketball competition. My son was playing in, and I do remember we used to play this game called bash ball. I remember the wall. You throw the ball against the wall, and if you caught it, you had to run back to the wall and you'd get punched before getting there. It was a pretty wild existence, but back in the mean streets of Logan, but it toughened you up a bit, I suppose. And then look at university. I suppose, look, I loved university. I enjoyed it. But I probably enjoyed the freedom too much in the first couple of years, and became a little recalcitrant going to classes. And one of the main recommendations of my kids is to turn up. Life's determined by those who turn up, because I found myself struggling to pass about 3 years into university. And so I kind of turned my life around. I decided, okay, well, what am I going to do here? Am I going to make something of myself? And I think it was in third or fourth year, I started to wear business clothes to university. I took a briefcase in. I was a real nerd. No one was doing this, but it just changed my mindset, and I applied myself. Ended up with first class honours, so I was proud of that. But yeah, for university is a wonderful experience. But it is a big shock, I think, for a lot of young people to go from that regimented, hierarchical school existence to, hey, you don't have to turn up to class, and too much freedom sometimes can be a bad thing.
Exactly, exactly. And I was going to say as well, I thought you were going to mention your near communist experience as one of your memorable moments in university. Um,
Well, I'd sort of covered that. In fact, actually, I'll tell you a story from that. I turned up at university market day. So I didn't mention I went to University of Queensland. I had a great time there, great institution. And our first day is the thing called market day, where you sort of can join up clubs and groups. And I went to the socialist worker tent because of my sympathies, and they had a front page on their paper that day of Howard is a racist. This was in 1998. So Howard is a racist. And I got in an argument with the guy saying, well, I don't like John Howard because, I was a communist at the time. But I don't think he's a racist. It's a bit over the top. And I fortunately for my future political career, never joined up, because I thought these people are idiots. They're just propagandists. They're not seriously taking these issues properly, not taking these issues seriously. So yeah, I didn't join up. It did come back to bite me a little bit, because I told Barnaby that story. And a week before my pre-selection, he got a call from the Australian, and he told them that I was a member of the Socialist Party of Australia. Even though I hadn't actually signed up, he quite slightly misinterpreted the article. So that, they did print my disclaimer that now I never have been, and never was a member of the Communist Party of Australia. So that was fortunate. But yeah, a week out of pre-selection, it wasn't the best thing to be in the paper for me.
yeah, and that is a really different sort of turnaround because, as we know, Senator, you're on the right side now of politics. And back when you were, in university, you were sympathizing towards socialism and communism. And I think a lot of young people, especially nowadays, are very, and it probably would be the same back in your era as well, but a lot of young people are very, very sympathetic towards those ideologies. And
Yeah,
um,
yeah, yeah.
from my experience as well in university currently, you always see the Socialist Alliance and all these left-wing groups just all over campus. And a lot of times, like, they've got these illegal stalls they set up, they've got all these posters they hand around. They're really, really antagonizing and sometimes really annoying towards students who, don't really have a political view and don't want to be harassed by some sort of left-wing political ideology.
Yeah, look, that's true. And look, I suppose one thing that keeps me a little optimistic about the future is that I do think, while young people are vulnerable to those utopian type ideologies, because they want to change the world, they want things to be perfect, they're also contrarian as well. And that's, I suppose, what happened to me. That I thought being a communist at high school was a bit of a rebel, a bit of something different. But you go to university and they're all bloody socialists and communists. So, it's not that cutting edge. You're not really based, as they say these days. Didn't use that term in my day. But so I think there's always going to be space for a contest of ideas at university, because once one particular group gets dominant, they become uncool, and then people go to the other side. So look, I do think right now, when you look at the intellectual environment online, it is the right wing that's probably a little bit more vibrant, I'd say, and something more attractive. You see the rise of figures like Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro in the US. There's a little bit more. Yeah, I would use the word vibrancy on the intellectual right, whereas I think the intellectual left is heading down, I suppose, what is typically bedeviled communist movements of ideology, group speak, groupthink, and it's not particularly attractive, I think, for young people who perhaps want to be challenged and debate major ideas and issues, to have to use certain types of language and words or be ostracized if they don't.
Exactly. And I think young people nowadays really want to have that sort of freedom of speech. And in terms of, being isolated and being shunned in, their school community or their university community just because, they don't believe a certain belief and they're not
Mm.
following, the certain path is a big issue nowadays. And I think a lot of young boys now especially are really seeing that there are different ways to approach politics outside of, that left-wing ideology.
Yeah, I think there is a concerning aspect of this too, that because of this exclusionary environment that some aspects of the left have established online, that it forces those young people, and often young men, to the fringes for an alternative. And so I'm very concerned. I've been being the father of four boys, very concerned with the rise of the likes of Andrew Tate, who,
Mm.
from what I've seen, I mean, don't pretend to be an expert on the bloke, but from what I've seen, there's a certain element of his rhetoric, which is misogynistic and I think destructive. But Andrew Tate is someone all my boys' friends know about, and some of them find his discussions and rhetoric attractive. And so I worry about that backlash, that we are enforcing a certain set of rules, strict rules, dogmas, if you like, at school and university. And young people don't like that, and they will look to smash that, to break that, and in some ways that could end up being destructive for our overall society. So I've raised some concerns about that recently, that I think a lot of young men are becoming disillusioned with the modern world, and I don't think it's a good, healthy idea for any society to have large groups of disillusioned young men.
Exactly, exactly. And I totally agree with you that with the Andrew Tate view. Some people in my year level in high school were pretty sympathetic to him, and there are some things that not necessarily are bad that he says, but the whole misogynistic sort of outlook that he has on life is so not 21st century, and it's so not relevant towards the world that we live in now today. It might be relevant back in the 1940s, 50s, but women have rights now, which is really important to our society. And that sort of rhetoric and that sort of views that he possesses around misogyny is not really tolerated in our society, which is good.
Yeah, and look, I think there's another aspect of this as well from the right, if you like. There's been, in my lifetime, a fetishization of the workplace, of the economy. And I am an economist and I want to see a strong economy, but we have perhaps been guilty of only focusing on aspects of things like GDP or getting people into the workplace. And, we've established this, I think, purpose in life, the mission in life. We try to tell our children that the mission is to get a good career and rise up through the corporate ranks. And the more I've thought, as I've grown older, I just think, hey, actually, slaving away in a cubicle, and I've done that in the private sector, slaving away in a cubicle to midnight every night just to get advancements, actually not the main purpose of life. And therefore, we're sort of taking out what I think the central element of most people's existence is, to want to pass on your genetic material, if you want to put it like that. But you want to have children, right? Most people want to do that. There's a strong human instinct to do that. But I think we need to refine that on the conservative side of politics, that there's got to be space for that. That the work and the good, strong economy is a means to an end. It's not the end in itself. And I do worry on our side of politics we're guilty of fetishization of the workplace over and above family life, which I think is the most important metric of the health of a society.
Very, very true. Very, very true there. I know we are a bit limited for time. We've spent about 15 minutes on this really good topic, Senator, but I think we probably should be moving on to our next question, which actually does come from George, who couldn't be with us today. So just let me know if you're able to hear his whole question here.
Senator, you come from a diverse background with your parents immigrating from Italy to seek a better way of life. What are your opinions on multiculturalism today, and do you think it has helped or hampered Australia's growth?
Were you able to hear that, Senator?
Yeah, I got it loud and clear. A great question. Look, short answer is I think our multi-ethnic society is a fantastic attribute of Australia, and yes, I'm a beneficiary of that, if you like. It was actually my grandparents who came out from Italy,
Oh, okay.
but yes, my mum then got Italian citizenship, so that's a whole nother saga, which we probably don't have time to go into. Nearly kicked me out of Parliament, but. Yeah, that was a long issue. But yeah, so look, it's been a wonderful thing for our country to welcome those people from different cultural backgrounds. I think in terms of multiculturalism, we've got to be really careful about how we use and interpret that word. We of course come from lots of different cultures, but we can't have multiculturalism at the expense of a unified Australian culture, in my view. That to be a strong country, to be a unified nation, to be harmonious and as prosperous as we are, we have to have some unifying principles that make us distinctly Australian. And look, I can present a short summary of those, although, I'm not pretending to be the expert on those, but we tend to have an easygoing lifestyle. We respect everybody of different backgrounds and faiths. We have equality between men and women before the law. Obviously, we have an open and vibrant democracy. Basically, those things, and along with some others, are the basic tenets of Australia. And so as long as you're willing to sign up to those principles and values, I don't care where you come from, and obviously keep your individual cultural practices, religious practices, they all add to the tapestry of our wonderful modern Australian life. But I did come back to that point that I think sometimes people will extend multiculturalism to mean that we don't need to have any unifying principles to be an Australian. And I think, well, once we do that, we don't have a country anymore, and we'll lose the great gift we've been given as descendants of what is one of the most harmonious, peaceful, prosperous countries in the world.
Exactly, exactly. And we can't let ourselves, I guess, be forced. As you said, it's important that we keep our own cultural identity from where we've come from, but it's important that we also assimilate a little bit and, work with other different
Hmm.
sorts of cultures because we can't be segregating ourselves into small conglomerates, of certain suburbs and towns of major cities. We have to try and assimilate a little bit and, connect with other cultures and other distinct language groups from across the world.
Yeah, well said. It's a two-way street. It's got to be a two-way street. When you come and migrate here, first you're a guest, and like I would be to any other country I visit, you try and adopt to the culture and respect that culture that you're moving to. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. We'll move on to our next question for you, Matt. So you did touch on this in the introduction, but after university, Senator, you worked as an economist for the Productivity Commission, eventually becoming the director in 2009, 2010, and at KPMG as a senior executive. Are you able to talk to us about your career in these firms and what learning opportunities did you take from these experiences as an economist that you are now using in your political career?
Well, look, yeah, I think in terms of my current career, the Productivity Commission was more relevant. I'll touch briefly on KPMG, but the Productivity Commission is a bit of a unique institution across the world. It's independent of government, but still a government agency. So it's set up to, potentially at times criticise government policy, and I think it served that purpose really well by being influential in changing some ways we've done things in economic policy in our country. I mean, the key takeaway I took from working at the Productivity Commission is that you have to apply economic theory in practical ways. The Productivity Commission, despite some of its reputation, actually ran a very open, discursive public inquiry process. So the Productivity Commission often had particular views about, say, needing to get tariffs down or remove regulations, typically policies associated with the Productivity Commission. But then when we do the inquiry, we would listen to people in the manufacturing sector that might be affected by lower tariffs and/or those affected by deregulation and moderate those recommendations. So we'd have adjustment packages, or we may not go as hard as we perhaps would have thought because of those real world impacts. So that taught me a lot about politics as well, which is the same sort of thing, that we've got to always be very mindful of the impact of policies on individuals. And I'm a member of the Nationals Party, and we see that all the time, that when often there are policies decided in Canberra, they have very little understanding of the real world impact of their policies on people's, on industries, on people's jobs. And also, there's a feedback loop here that if they don't understand the impact, they often don't understand the industry, and they often make decisions that are completely disconnected with the reality. So from the Productivity Commission, I really learned how you've got to go to the farms, you've got to go to the factories, which we would do in the PC. A bit unlike most other government departments in Canberra, they'll stay in Canberra. They don't travel out and talk to people on the front lines of our economy. Even something like Treasury, it rarely happens. Whereas the Productivity Commission did that through its inquiry process, and that feedback into our political system is absolutely essential to maintain goodwill across our political spectrum. And then look, from the KPMG, look, I mainly did economic analysis then. I still am, I think, a bit of a gun on Microsoft Excel. That helped a lot. I can still do all that. We used to have a rule: if you touch the mouse, you got to get doc pay. Everything was on the keyboard. We'd be very fast building economic models, and look, I still do that from time to time. I mean, just recently, actually, the government announced a policy on the National Vehicle Emission Standards, which is effectively a tax and credit scheme on electric vehicles and diverse vis-a-vis petrol vehicles. And while the Senate Estimates Committee was going on, I was able to build a spreadsheet model, which was basically what I learned at KPMG, and estimate the cost impact of these policies. And that's very helpful, obviously, in my role today to be able to feed that back into the political process.
Exactly. And I think touching back on your work in the Productivity Commission, I think it is important that, sometimes government does lose track of, how their policies do affect, people in those sort of industries. And, they sometimes, for example, they sometimes care too much about big business and, those lobbyists who come to Parliament and have the money to, talk to the treasurer, talk to these sort of people. But sometimes they forget, from my experience, from what I've seen, they forget to talk to, the small businesses, the workers who are actually working in these companies, and assess, what sort of risk and what sort of things will happen if these policies go through for those sort of people within those industries.
Yeah, you're right. And if I can use a real world example here that I've been central to, and that's the discussion about the future of Australia's coal industry. I mean, just in the last few weeks, we've seen this sort of discussion that from the Prime Minister that we need to build these solar panels now to employ all the coal miners who will be out of work when the world transitions away from coal. I mean, and this is breathlessly reported by major media and the bureaucracy in Canberra that somehow there's a transition away from coal. When if you just live, like I'm here in coal country right now, coming to you from Yeppoon, a lot of people work in the coal industry here, drive in, drive out to the mines. This economy is booming. Like, we have never been going stronger. Because all of us know that if you want a job in the coal industry, you just have to put your hand up. Like, they are screaming for workers right now because last year the world used more coal than ever before. And people, this becomes a shock to people in Canberra. They can't believe it because everything they're reading is people aren't using coal anymore, when actually in China and Korea and India, they're using record amounts of coal. And we've got some of the best coal in the world, so it's going gangbusters. So this disconnect really frustrates me. It's like you're telling us that we're poor and we're downtrodden and we need all this support. And I walk down the streets and cafes and restaurants are just doing amazing trade. That disconnect from reality is what really, really frustrates people with the political process right now. They hear their political leaders say stuff that they know in their real world and real life is complete lies, absolute lies. And they shake their heads and think, well, these guys are idiots, and they disconnect from it all. And that's why you're seeing, I think, a rise in distrust in our media, in our politics, because people aren't telling the truth.
Exactly. And, sometimes honesty is the best policy in terms of politics, because at the end of the day, people are going to be able to see through if you're lying and, going up front to the
Yeah,
media and
yeah.
saying something that's fake.
No, absolutely. People live a life, right? And they see what's going on in their real life. Like, they're told that things are going great and inflation's coming down. Go to the shops, you can barely afford to pay for the bill at the end of it, right? People see that, and so my main frustration with politics right now is we've got to start telling the truth. We got to stop lying, and I know so many politicians who lie daily. Like when you speak to them privately, oh yes, Matt, you're right. The coal industry is not going at the back door, or renewable energy is going to be hard to fill the gaps in the electricity system. But they won't say that publicly because the polls tell them to say a different thing. So because they do some polling that says renewable energy is popular, they will knowingly lie about that issue to the Australian public. And that might get them elected next time. It might get you through an election cycle. But every time you lie, you slightly increase the distrust that is with our political system. And if we keep going down this path, we'll soon no longer have a functioning democracy because no one believes anything people say. And so I'm just trying to say, look, I think for the good of our nation, for the good of our political system, we got to tell the truth. And if I lose an election because I tell the truth, I can still sleep at night. I'll go on with my life. It's not the end of the world, but it'd be a much better world if people told the truth more often.
Exactly, because as we said before, people can see through the truth, and people at the end of the day have the right to vote you out. And if you keep
Hmm.
continuously lying throughout your whole political career, it's going to catch up with you eventually. Hopefully, of course, but it will catch up with you eventually. So, that's sort of, and we don't want distrust and sort of in the government because as we've seen recently as well, the rise of minor and third parties because of the distrust some people have been facing towards the coalition, the Labour Party is. It's not really good for. It's not great for democracy because at the end of the day, Labour and Labour and coalition are going to have to work with the crossbench more and third parties like the Greens, who a lot of their policies are just out of this world and aren't really related to real world economic issues, for example. So
Yeah,
that sort of
although
distrust
my
is
complaint here is with my own side primarily, right? And because those people in the Greens, they genuinely believe these things, and so I'm not accusing them. They're not really lying because they think that this is the right way to go, and I disagree. What I'm really frustrated with, and it's not just in political circles, it's in corporate circles as well. I was at a dinner the other night. People saying, "Oh, it's really hard for people to put their head above the parapet right now and say the things that I was saying at this dinner because they said they'll get their head shot off." And I said, "No, you won't. I mean, you're not going to die. You're not going to go to jail even yet. Maybe that'll come one day with climate criminals or something, but it's not there yet. No one's going to jail for this stuff unless you're Donald Trump. But, you're not going to jail. I mean, all you're going to do if you tell the truth and show a bit of courage is you might lose your job. I mean, you'll get another job. You won't go to these people that are complaining about getting their head blown off. Most of them are very well to do. They're not going to start joining the breadlines, right? And so there's this. I don't know. I don't understand it, mate. But there's this sort of faux equivalence of war, of violence, of revolution to our current political system, which is just not there. Yeah, I mean, so why don't we have corporate leaders with the courage to call this out? And yeah, maybe they get voted out of their job at an AGM because they've shown some courage. But wouldn't you prefer to live your life like that and be able to in your retirement? Yes, I did everything I could. I fought hard. Instead of meekly going with the flock. And yep, okay, then you get shorn every year and you get a nice life in the pasture in the fields. But you get to retirement and think, what did I do with my life? Why didn't I stand up for the truth when I had the opportunity? So look, that frustrates me right now. Because I suppose if we don't tell the truth enough, maybe we'll lose our democracy. Maybe we will end up with, what's going on in Brazil right now is terrible. There you can see this. There are people who want to make free speech illegal. And so it's about time some people get serious here and stand up for the principles that have built our Western democracy, even if that comes at some price to the people calling these things out initially.
exactly. And if we can't, so from your example, do you think that into the future that you hope that corporate leaders and that sort of thing will continue will start to tell the truth, or do you not really see that into the future?
Yeah, I'm not holding my breath on that front. I'll make that call and wish it could be otherwise. Look, I think we're in a situation where it'll probably take some kind of crisis for real courage to emerge, I suppose. And that's often the case in Australian history. It wasn't my saying, but someone wise once said that Australia is a country that's very poor at managing prosperity, but excellent at managing adversity. And so we've had a very prosperous period over the past 30 years. I've been very fortunate, my generation, leaving high school in the mid-1990s. I really haven't suffered a recession in the workplace. I wouldn't classify COVID really as a recession because the government spent so much money. Most people, not everybody, but most people ended up with higher average incomes. So look, we haven't really experienced that economic hardship, but you would think eventually that will break. There's no real example of this kind of run of economic performance in most countries. And when we do get that reality check, I hope that people will wake up and will realize that actually we have to start making some tough choices. Life is about making tough choices and we can't have it all. So look, I suppose I'm not going to hold my breath right now, but I'm trying to bring that moment forward to the best I think it should happen. I'm only one person and I might be completely wrong, but I am telling you exactly what I think, because by telling you what I think is, it cost me my career prospects, and that's fine. Don't care about that. But I think you can say at least that I'm trying to come from a principle of good faith, because I certainly it hasn't benefited me telling you what I'm telling you the last couple of years. But I want to see us as a country wake up to ourselves before we end up in way too much government debt, the loss of major economic industries, which we won't get back. And then it'll be a lot tougher if we get to that point.
Yeah, exactly there. And as we've said before, as you said before, that we haven't really had an economic downturn in a long time. We've been booming for the last 20, 30 years. So, and I think I don't want to say anything bad to Australians, to our people, but they are a little bit too cushiony on the couch and that sort of thing. And we haven't really experienced that much economic downturn since the Keating years. So it's been I think as you've said, it might be a good opportunity now for people to, actually realize that they have to make tough decisions and they have to make trade-offs, and you can't have really everything that you want in society.
Yeah, look, I've got great faith that Australians will wake up to that. As I say, the history of our country is that when the call goes out, we do unify really well and come together and make those tough choices. We did going back to my Productivity Commission days. A lot of the decisions that were made in the 1980s, 1990s, a bit before my time there, but were led by groups like the Productivity Commission, were difficult choices. Deregulation, removing tariffs and protection, were hurtful to a lot of people, but clearly in hindsight, they were the right decisions to open up our economy at the time and become more competitive. We had to, we were forced to, because as Paul Keating was not wrong in saying, we were looking down the barrel of becoming a banana republic. And look, we're not there yet. We're very prosperous right now. I mean, the mining industry is going gangbusters, but I just am concerned that we're on the cusp of losing the nickel industry. There is a real risk that our iron ore rivers of gold will dry up in future decades as more iron ore mines are opened, particularly in Africa. We could kill our own coal industry by the looks of it, despite massive demand around the world. People don't need our coal. There's plenty of other coal around the world if we shut it down. And then what do we do? How are we going to maintain the kind of expectations we've got for services right now? I mean, look at the NDIS. It's costing us more than $50 billion a year, more than double Medicare. And it's only come this is just in the last few years, this has emerged. People are expecting this type of stuff now. Well, we can't fund those types of public services unless we have a very, very well-performing economy, which we've had, luckily, for the last 20 years or so, pretty much on the back of a booming mining economy. But people don't seem to always understand that, and they're risking that golden egg by playing with fire here on economic policy.
Yeah, because as we've seen, we can't continuously spend all the time because that money's going to come from somewhere, and unfortunately, sometimes it's got to come back from the people, and a lot of people can't stand increasing taxes. So how are we supposed to fund everything if we can't? If how are we supposed to fund everything without increasing taxes in that sense? So I think, as you said, Australian people hopefully do recognize that eventually we can't continuously spend at this sort of rate, and we have to cut some sort of industries because at the end of the day, if we default on our debts, it's going to ruin our credit rating, and it's going to in turn destroy our economy.
Yeah, look, as I say, I've got great faith in young people. I think there's a backlash brewing against woke. I see it in my own children. They're sick of this stuff. They're sick of being force-fed rainbow medicine at schools and at universities. It's a real undercurrent there that I think the media and others are missing, and it sort of pops up in the rise of people like Andrew Tate. But I do have confidence that there'll be more reputable figures that they get behind. Jordan Peterson, for example. I mean, look at that. I mean, it's amazing the amount of young people. And I went with my son to Jordan Peterson a few years ago, and it's just unbelievable. He is principally explaining a traditional conservative, small c conservative, not a political message, but a conservative message about personal responsibility. And it's extremely attractive to young people. They're desperate and hungry for this as an alternative to the ideology. It's not just, I mean, at least, I don't understand the left at the moment, the modern left. I mean, when I was attracted to communism, at least communism was sort of a coherent, detailed, complex theory, and there was a rational argument around the parts of it, and there was quite a lot of different angles you could go at it from. This sort of rise of this pronoun theocracy, it's so simplistic. It's not particularly, intellectually stimulating anything about it. And that's where I come back to that point we spoke about before, that on the intellectual dark web, if you want to call it that, it's the figures on the right I find that are much more attractive and interesting to listen to, whether it's Tucker Carlson or Ben Shapiro. They've got lots of different views. I mean, they're fighting with each other at the moment over Israel, but it's really interesting and really engaging. Whereas on the left, it's like one worldview, and if you don't share that, you're out of the classroom, you're out of the school. It's not particularly attractive. So I think they're going to lose this over the next few decades.
I believe we're up to our fourth question with you, Senator. This is supposed to be from Tobias, who unfortunately couldn't be here, but I'll say it on his behalf. So, you began your public service career as the Chief of Staff, as you said before, to the Shadow Minister for Finance at the time, Barnaby Joyce. How did working in the political environment prepare you for your own political career?
Well, I learned a lot from Barnaby, and particularly just about basic grassroots political representation, which at its heart is an honourable profession. And so you mentioned Barnaby was Shadow Finance Minister when I started for him, and so I came to work for him as an economist in that role. Within a month, he'd been shifted. If you remember, he was going around saying everyone's going to go broke, which he's sort of right about, but anyway, it caused too much reality for Canberra to tolerate. So he got shifted, and I could have gone to work for Andrew Robb, but when I looked at it, like Andrew has a very similar background to me, an economist, used to work for the NFF, and I like Andrew, who's great, but I decided to stay with Barnaby because he was something different, and he exposed me to the town hall meetings, how to deal with industries under pressure, under stress. At the time that I worked for him, the cattle industry was on my teeth on grassroots politics of how to take an issue for a local farmer, for a local factory, and try and get a solution for them through the political system. So, he's very good at that, and I was very privileged to work for him. Another guy that didn't have the same high profile as Barnaby, but a guy called Ron Boswell. He was the sixth longest serving senator in our nation's history, over 30 years, another Queensland senator. Same thing. He just took up local issues, whether it's the fishing industry, the tobacco industry before my time, and he'd get solutions for them. That's I've tried to do a little bit of that, and I think as a senator, you've got more capacity to do that, to take up these issues, elevate them to the top of the political, or closer to the top of the political discussion, and get some kind of result, even if it's not a perfect outcome. So, that's where I think the Senate's really there for. It's meant to sort of give rise to these, give a bit of voice to these issues. I fear that we're failing a bit because like 85% of our senators are based in capital cities now. There's a massive concentration there, and that sort of then doubles down on the bias towards the capital cities in the House of Reps. I think it's a real shame, and I think we should look at maybe electing our senators on a regional basis, like happens at state level, so that they're more spread out around our country, and that these less well represented rural and remote voices, including Indigenous communities, get a bigger voice in our nation's parliament. That'd be better than The Voice. That would be a lot better than The Voice.
Senator, I think I cut out for a little bit, so I missed a lot of what you were saying there.
You want to do that again, or?
Yeah, just do it maybe quickly again. Just quickly summarize it, I guess, because we only got 10 minutes
So
with
what
you.
Can you just raise the question? Oh, look, I can extend it a bit long. It's just a staff meeting, so I can push it back.
Yeah.
I don't too much later, but yep.
Yeah.
What
So
was the question again?
you began your public service as the Chief of
Yes.
Staff to then the Shadow Minister for Finance, Barnaby Joyce. How did working in this political environment prepare you for your own political run?
Well, look, it just taught me about grassroots politics. Barnaby obviously is a fantastic politician at taking an issue from a town hall meeting and then driving it through the political system. And I remember being at a town hall meeting with him in Mildura on the Murray-Darling Basin, and farmers were up in arms about the proposed cuts to water allocations that were going to cost them their livelihoods. And they wanted him to start a Senate inquiry into it. And he said, look, I'm going to go back to Canberra and do my best. Next day, we flew back to the Parliament, and amazingly, we got that passed with Nick Canavan support. So that kind of ability to take an issue from the grassroots, drive it through a political system, is something that I've tried to do. There's another guy called Ron Boswell, who I replaced effectively. He was our sixth longest serving senator. He did that. He was a par excellence at that. He just take up little issues, feed them through our political system. And I think that's when our Senate works the best. Works the best when it is giving voice to the voiceless. And I don't think a Senate's doing that right now, or not as well as it could be, because 85% of our senators are based in capital cities. I think we should look at a model which elects our senators on a regional basis, like happens
Yeah.
in upper houses at state level, so that we get more of a voice for regional, remote, Indigenous people. That would be better than the voice, giving voice through the Senate to those less populated areas of our country.
Exactly, I agree with you there because as we've seen a lot of, I think in Victoria, I think the only senator that we have that's based in the region technically is Senator Mackenzie, and I think Senator Henderson's based
Yeah,
in Geelong, but it's not
that's
technically really
true.
in the
That's true.
regions. So a lot of the
Yep.
regional people only have really their lower house MPs for actual representation of the regions. So I think, as you did say, there should be a little bit of reform in that sense. Maybe splitting it. You know, uh one person for for Victoria's example, one person for maybe the Eastern Victorian region, one person for the Northern Victorian, one person for the Western Victorian, and maybe the rest for in
That's how you
a
do it in your upper
metropolitan.
house. You do that in your upper house in
Yeah,
Victoria. That's how it
exactly. I think
works. So we
you
could
should
do that for
probably
the Senate. Yeah.
exactly. I think because that will give us, actual clear representation of, which upper house MP is representing which area, and they're not
Mm,
covering, vast stretches of a state because the state issues in different areas are different, of course, because an issue in the
mm.
inner city is going to be a lot different to an issue, for example, in Shepparton or Mildura. So, and a senator's supposed to represent all of Victoria, which can be hard sometimes when there's clashes with those sort of issues in the state.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So, well, I'll keep pushing for that. Few of us are in the Nationals Party.
Yeah. We'll move on now to our next question for you, Senator. This also comes from George. Um, Let me know if you're able to hear it.
Who would you say is a political role model or idol?
Are you able to hear that, Senator?
Yeah, got it, got it. Look, I'll pick two. Winston Churchill, for his he had enormous courage and persistence. It was a sort of a strange career that he basically represented every political party under the sun except for Labor Party. But he was also quite consistent in his own ideological positions over time, and obviously played a seminal role in saving the Western world in World War II. And then I'd also just add to that John Anderson, who has been a bit of a mentor for me. John, I think is an amazingly respectful politician, statesman. You really should say in our politics. Very lucky to have him as a leader in our Nationals Party, and he's still very much involved in the broader political discussion. He's got a great
Yeah.
podcast. People want to check that out. Great friends with Jordan Peterson. He's doing great work with a new organisation called the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, which is sort of countering Davos on the world stage. Good luck to them. So yeah, look, I've got a lot of time for John as well.
Yeah, and he recently ran for Nationals pre-selection
Yes, so
2 years ago.
yeah, and look, Ross Cadell's great. He won that, so long live the king. Ross is great, and
We've
I
interviewed him
think things
before,
happen for a
so
reason. I think that I've seen that, and I think things happen for a reason because I reckon John is doing even more important work through this Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, working with Jordan Peterson, with great people around the world, and doing his podcast. Coming back to the grubby arena of politics, I think would have been beneath him now. So I'm glad John's still involved.
yeah, you don't have to be involved in politics, per se, to be a member of parliament. You can be involved in other sorts of
Yep,
ways, as John is proving currently.
absolutely right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, as you guys do too. No doubt. So, yep.
Thank you for that, Senator. I do appreciate it. Yeah. We'll move on to our next question for you, Senator. So this comes from Tobias. What made you run in the 2013 federal pre-selection for the National Party, and what made you join the National Party? And I do know in Queensland it is the
Yeah.
Liberal National Party, so
Yeah, no, you're
technically,
right. I didn't really cover that aspect. So I first joined the Liberal Party because I grew up in Brisbane and it was before we merged. Then I moved to Canberra after uni and was in the Liberal Party in Canberra. And then eventually decided to get involved in frontline politics. And I got involved in frontline politics because I was frustrated by what I saw as the overspending of the Rudd government, wasteful spending during the post-global financial crisis period. And so I thought, look, I should get more involved here. I'm in Canberra. I can do this quite easily. So that's how I ended up working for Barnaby Joyce. I actually applied for Tony Abbott first, but got a job with Barnaby Joyce. And then so that's how I got to know the Nationals Party. And after the 2010 election, I flipped. I joined the Nationals Party because I really liked the culture, I liked the people, and was working for them. And so I do come from both. Obviously, during my time in Canberra, the parties in Queensland merged. Why I ran then at the 2013 election was because the guy I mentioned earlier, Ron Boswell, was retiring, and he encouraged me. And while I'd made the decision to get more involved in frontline politics as a staffer, I didn't actually think I'd become a politician because my wife and I were quite happy in Canberra. We had 3 kids. There wasn't a hugely attractive future for a Conservative politician in Canberra. There's not a lot of options there. So I
Exactly.
didn't think that was in my future crystal ball. But when Ron retired, he really encouraged me, and eventually I said, "Okay, I'll give it a shot." Moved back to Queensland, and I was very, very lucky. Senate pre-selections are very tough, and there was a big field. A lot of luck went my way, which I'm obviously very thankful for and grateful for. And then I, got the gig and tried to do the best I could.
And that's what all politicians should be doing, trying to do the best they can in general. And I don't really know much about your pre-selection contest, Senator, but I'm
Right.
guessing it was very heavily
Happy.
contested.
I'm happy to give you the short story in limited time we've got. But yeah, I was up against the vice president of the then vice president of the Liberal National Party, Gary Spence. When he announced, I thought, I've got no chance. I'm just moving back to Queensland. I've been away for 5 or 6 years. And so they obviously didn't know too many people. And I get along with Gary Spence, who was the vice president, get along with him really well. Great guy. But the problem, what I didn't quite understand, was a bit naive, but when you're vice president of a party, of course, you end up some people like you, some people don't, because you have
Mm.
to make decisions, and so there's a section of the party that perhaps didn't want Gary, and look, they I think they went through and cycled through a few people, and eventually latched onto me for some reason, and that sort of helped me get through there. There was another great guy called David Van Gend. My wife, I didn't get to watch the other speeches, right? We get put out the back while other people speak to the. It's a major process in Queensland. There's about 400 delegates who vote on this. This went all day into the night, 16 candidates. And this guy, David Van Gen, my wife says that he gave a better speech than me. So,
Are you sure your wife
great
voted
mates
for
with
you?
David. I don't know. No, she didn't get a vote. She didn't get a vote. Maybe if she
Oh,
did get a vote, who knows? She was just an observer. But he is a great orator, David, and he nearly won. He was very, very close. So I was very lucky, very fortunate. I was a bit of a dark horse, but as I say, very thankful for that, and I've tried to make the best of it.
yeah, and hopefully you get to serve the people of Queensland for many more years to come. Because I know you're coming up to an election year, aren't you, this year? Technically for
Yeah,
Senate.
I'm not up for
Oh,
election. I got elected
ah,
last time, so
oh yeah.
still 4 and a bit years on my term. So yep, we'll see what happens then.
We'll see what happens exactly. We'll move on now to our final question for you, Senator. So, finally, what's one piece of advice you'd give to students in 2024, especially those who are starting university or high school?
Look, I'll start with something a little prosaic, but just go to class. And as I said earlier, I didn't do that for a couple of years, fell behind, and I greatly regret it. Go to class, and I suppose more generally, get involved. It is an amazing time in your life at university. You've got so much opportunity. So I wish I'd gotten more involved, and I'm really proud of one of my sons at UQ now, and he's building rockets and involved in all this extracurricular stuff. So really proud of what he's doing, and that's my advice. Get involved. You'll never get this time back. Look, the other advice I would have is slightly different, and that's to make sure you have interests and a life outside of university. That most people are going to university obviously for a vocation and wanting to get a job. That's really important. It's really important to get a good job, and it's one of the basic things to tick off if you want to be happy in your life. But it's not the only thing. It's not sufficient for your life have happiness. So make sure you don't let slip your friendships, your family, your religion if you're that way inclined. You keep a proper perspective on life, and a successful life is about balancing all these different things: work, family, and I think ultimately a spiritual calling as well, whatever that might be. I think again to be happy, think about who you are in this world and what you're here to do.
Exactly, because I myself, I'm from a very deeply Catholic sort of family. I know you are as well, Senator. So it's always important, to have that sort of religious or sort of spiritual background. Whether that you don't necessarily have to be Catholic or even Christian to be a religious or spiritual person. You can be Muslim, you can be Hindu, you can be Buddhist, whatever. So I think it's important, as you said, to have some faith, some family, and have a vocational career, and try and spend as much time as possible within all of them, and don't always focus so much on your career because your spiritual and your family life could be affected by that.
Yeah, and you'll probably find a lot of successful people, their career benefits from praying daily, all those things, keeping some discipline. It puts your life in perspective, because whatever happens in your life, you're going to come up with times that have you get stressed, you've got problems paying bills, or you lose a job, or you don't miss out on a promotion, whatever it might be, that is a high stress. If you've got that grounding of faith and a presence in the world, you can withstand all that stuff. You'll be stronger than you know. So that's why I think that's really important, because it almost ironically helps you with your career to have that balanced life rather than just obsess about one thing.
Exactly. And as you were saying before as well, for students out there, just show up to class. That's all,
Yeah,
that's all you
yeah.
need to do. Just show up.
I mean,
Because
it
I
must be
know,
much harder for you guys. You got everything online now. You could just do
yeah,
that. But there's no substitute for, I think COVID taught us, right? There's no substitute for meeting people, because it's not just about the class. It's about talking to your teacher, meeting the other students. And I finally did that in honours year. In honours year, I got heavily involved, and it was so much more enjoyable university. And I got so much more out of it. I just wish I'd done that first couple of years as well.
yeah. And I've seen in my university, and I think George and Tobias are there who would relate completely to this, but there are many people in our class who just don't show up. Like, I had some classes yesterday. I would say, we normally have 30, 40 people. There was probably 15 people in class. So
They're missing out. They're missing
they are
out.
missing
Yeah.
out. And
More power to you
that's
guys.
and our tutes are just not recorded. So you can't get back the stuff that you
Oh,
don't learn
right.
in
Okay.
class. Yeah, so
Okay.
in my
All right.
university, our tutorials aren't recorded. It's only the lectures.
Probably a
And
good thing. Probably a
you
good
can
thing. Yeah.
rewatch the
Yeah.
lectures, but you can't,
Yeah.
rewatch the tutorials because you're not there in person. So, you're losing out
Yeah.
on, important and integral education in that sense.
Yep. You're paying for it. You may as well turn up.
Exactly, exactly. So yeah, those are all our questions for you, Senator. So I do really appreciate you coming on the podcast. I know you have a meeting for your office probably currently that should be happening right now. So I will let you go at this point. But yeah, we do really appreciate you coming on and talking to us about little bit about your political career prior to your career prior to politics, sorry. And what you think should be happening in terms of how Australia adjusts and moves forward.
Thanks so much. I really thank you for the opportunity, and all the best for the podcast. Great initiative.
Yeah. Yeah.